this. All right, welcome everybody to the Health Transformation webinar. This is Cade Archibald speaking here, and I'm going to join you guys on the Instagram world here in a moment as well. But we are live on the webinar as well. So really excited to be here today. We're going to be talking about Lyme or mold, and which one is it, because they have very similar symptoms and very similar cases. And so with us, we got our expert, the founder of East West Health, just an overall amazing guy. I'll give you some credit at this time. We got Reagan Archibald. How you doing, Reagan?
Really good. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Cool.
I'm doing well. Let's dive into this. So what do people need to know about Lyme or mold? I know it's not good, but what should we know?
I think you should know that by the end of this seminar or the end of this webinar, you guys are going to be able to see how very similar these two things are. And a lot of people are coming up with Lyme disease, and there's a whole expert panels of these infectious disease doctors that are really diving into Lyme disease. But really, the treatments have not been super effective. And so I started digging into some of the research, and I discovered that Lyme and mold, actually, they manifest the same way symptomatically. But at least 50% of people who have been diagnosed with Lyme have mold. And by some studies, it's even higher. And so we're going to jump into that because I think it's really important for everybody to start looking at your environment, seeing how you can best protect yourself. Because our goal here at East West Health is we want people to live a free, energized, fully expressive life where they're empowered to take their health into their own hands. And if you have a condition like mold or Lyme, that's really going to get in the way of your health independence. And so, Cade, have you ever been exposed to mold that you're aware of?
Yeah, I think in probably smaller doses, absolutely. Just like you can smell it and you can feel it. If you're in like old hotels, it just smells kind of damp.
Yep.
And I just have a little bit of brain fog, don't feel quite right, feel a little sluggish, sometimes get like congested. That's usually what I'll notice.
Yeah, I know you and I have stayed at certain hotels and when we're doing events, and suddenly it's like you can feel it right in your sinuses pretty quickly. And so what studies show is that more than 50% of homes have mold exposure in them. They test positive for mold. 85% of commercial buildings in the United States have water damage and mold. So if you look at the commercial buildings, I'm always fascinated when I'm in a high rise and none of the windows open. And that always disturbs me because you're just depending on this like filtration system to keep clean air circulating. And they do it to save money on energy, but forget saving money on energy. If you've got mold exposure, your energy just got zapped right out of your body. So it's worth the investment. Open a door in your hallway, get some breeze going through. I know it's the winter time here in Utah, and we're coming to the end of winter, which is when our snow starts melting. So make sure that you're getting nice, fresh, clean air circulating through your house. Look for any mold damage. We've had a beast of a winter. And so really start looking for these things, because here's what can happen. When the body is exposed to any kind of mold during a Lyme infection, what happens is if you already have Lyme or even if you have like Epstein-Barr virus, or if you've been exposed to, maybe you've had strep recently or some type of, chronic infection, then what's going to happen is any type of small mold exposure, it amplifies those symptoms. And so if you look at Lyme sufferers, what will happen is you're going to have more issues with the brain fog. You're going to have more issues with the achy joints. You're going to be very depleted, and you're going to be very achy. And so start looking at the co-infections. So the other thing you can look at is if you have any type of mercury exposure, that mold is going to exacerbate your symptoms just as much. And so what Dr. J. Davidson said is around half of unresolved Lyme cases could be linked to mold illnesses. And you're going to learn from a couple other doctors here that they think it may be even more than that. So how many of you have ever had Lyme disease? How many of you have been tested positive for it? We've done a lot of work with like Dr. Klinghardt out of Seattle. And yes, there are some pretty fascinating ways of using an ultrasound device to drive Lyme out of the tissue where they're hiding, out of their little biofilm, so that you can get a real test for it. But a lot of Lyme tests still goes undetected. You get these false negatives, and then we think, oh, it's not Lyme. But now we're starting to realize that maybe it's mold toxicity could be a little more of the problem than we ever imagined. So, Kate, if you look at it, if you look at some of the blood labs, what are some of the inflammatory markers that people would want to look at, or what are some of the markers that we would get this like kind of high alert and say, hey, they could have like Lyme, they could have mold or some type of chronic infection?
Yeah, so typically you'll see homocysteine increased, CRP could be impacted. You could also have some of your blood cells up, like white blood cells, because it's your immune system's trying to fight an infection.
Exactly. Yeah, this is where you'll see monocytes, through the roof, or leukocytes. And so when Dr. Andrew Heyman, he's the doctor that first introduced this concept that, it may not be Lyme so much as it is mold. And actually getting rid of mold, which we're going to talk about the solution in just a minute, but getting rid of mold from your life, from your diet, from your environment, those things could actually be the process that you need to go through in order to reverse the Lyme. So let's talk about it. What he found is that Lyme and mold, even though symptoms are typically the same, and the blood labs, they can be the same, the proteomic markers can be the same, but what he found is there's two things that are different. And when he measured the volume areas of the brain, and they found that against their hypothesis that sure enough, the brain was damaged from the inflammation from mold and Lyme, but the injury pattern was different between the two. So pretty interesting when they actually looked at that. And so what Dr. Heyman, when he started creating treatments for this, what he did is he said that, well, NAD is one of the most powerful molecules that you can use into a nasal spray. And then not only NAD, but using methylcobalamin, which is a version of methylated B12, and then also using some of the ginsengenoids in a spray called RG3 or synapsin. And he found that was able to phenomenally decrease the either Lyme or mold exposure and mitigate a lot of the symptoms that were going on there. And so this NAD is the nicotinamide, and the nicotinamide is one of these longevity molecules. So even if you haven't been exposed, or you think you haven't been exposed to either Lyme or mold, this treatment with RG3 and synapsin is something I've been using for about a year. And it's been amazing, because I remember being in the moldiest environment of my life was when I lived in Hawaii. And in Hawaii, I, obviously dead broke, just trying to make it through school, studying Chinese medicine. And I got the opportunity to rebuild this coffee shack. And the coffee shack was literally being held up by termites. We used to joke that the termites, if they quit holding hands, the whole thing would fall apart. And this was up in the higher mountain regions in Hawaii. Cade, you probably remember the place well.
Oh, yeah.
You remember you remember the mold smell? Can you still?
Yeah, I remember the musty scent.
Yeah, it was just smelled wet all the time because it rains all the time there. I mean, it's in a rainforest high up in the Holualoa area in Kona on the Big Island. But what happened is I started to get very sensitive. So if I eat certain foods, that would cause me to have more brain fog, more ache. And anytime I'd go there, I mean, I was like, could not wait to get off of that coffee shack. Once I graduated, I was like, I got to get out of here. And it's pretty interesting because if I would have had this synapsin, it would have been a game changer. But Synapsin is something you can get at like Jolly's Pharmacy. I know a lot of you who are listening are local here. You'll need a prescription, so you need to come and meet with one of our medical providers. Many of you are patients here at East West. We really love and appreciate you, by the way, and appreciate everyone for being on this. But let's get you a prescription and start out with some RG3 or some Synapsin. It's a very powerful treatment, very safe. This is the brand name is Synapsin. It was invented by Dr. James Lavelle, who is a pharmacist. Now, what he discovered is that if you can deliver B12 and some of the active components of ginseng, typically it's American ginseng that they're using, and then you add it in with the NAD, that's a great way to cognitively enhance your brain. But it's very safe, but it's also a way of moving out the mold toxicity, the mycotoxins. So here's another thing that you want to look at. If you are concerned that maybe you do react, you notice your sinuses get swollen or your eyes they always feel sleepy. This could be one of the symptoms that you've got some mold exposure in your life. And so one of the areas we want to look at test-wise is we want to look at your MTHFR, and then we also want to look at your HLA. And these two SNPs genetically have the capability of allowing us to see if you have a diminished ability to detoxify mold, or if your body has an inability to handle it. Because, Kate, have you ever been around somebody and you're like, man, that person, like, you know, maybe they're a painter or they work around a lot of toxic chemicals and they seem just totally healthy. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that they look totally healthy.
Okay, well, maybe they don't have a that's true. Most painters, like, no matter, even if you have like perfect methylation pathways, you're gonna get, pretty soon it will catch up. But basically,
yeah, I've seen them where they, you know, you look and you'd assume, yeah, pretty healthy.
Yeah, so this thing called epigenetics. So, you know, if you put two people side by side, you know, one person you guess they're 40 and they're really 50. The other person, you know, you guess that they're 60 and they're really 50. And so that's epigenetics, but based on how these methylation pathways work with your MTHFR, that has a lot to do with your ability to get rid and clear out some of these mycotoxins from the mold, or even clear out some of the spirochetes from the Lyme. And so this is an interesting thing, because patients who have methylation defects will certainly have more issues with the mold exposure. And so I've got that genetic SNP where I've got this MTHFR issue that I've dealt with my whole life. Actually, if you go the entire way up the methylation chain, all of those genes have a mutation there. And so it's really important for me not only to detoxify frequently, that's where, you know, exercise is a great way of pushing through the methylation pathways, getting some good cruciferous vegetables in your diet. That can be a great way that I use to work on my methylation. And then the other thing is just making sure I have hot and cold exposure. So I'm sweating and then I'm getting cold. And so I'm putting my body through these hormetic responses. And through that hormesis, breathing is another big one. That's where I'm able to actually convert a lot of these methyl groups so that I can have much better energy and I can recover quicker for my workouts. So if you've got the MTHFR, you know, type in the chat box, let us know, because it's the mother effer gene is the way you can remember it, but you're going to have a much more difficult time clearing this stuff out. And so even if you have the MTHFR, I would certainly recommend you have Synapsin on hand if you're traveling anywhere, because you get in a hotel room and it can literally wreck your whole vacation. I remember, I don't know if you remember, Kate, when Zoe turned 9, I took her to Disneyland, or took her to SeaWorld, in San Diego. And we had this crazy moldy room. And the first night I didn't sleep at all that night. And my nervous system was just agitated. The next day we checked out and I was so glad, but I wouldn't have slept a wink. So yeah, if I would have had some Synapsin, it may have helped a little bit, but really got to watch out for these exposures. So what about that?
I used to think you were just a really big diva.
I still am a bit of a diva, but
No,
yeah,
but now I know. That was a few years ago. I just didn't even understand that.
you're like, man, Reagan's so sensitive, these rooms. Like, it's a bed. We're just sleeping here. What's the big deal? Like, yeah, well, you try lying there for 8 hours and your body's just like being attacked. It's not fun. Okay, so let's talk about HLA. So HLA antigens are found on the surface of nearly every cell in the body, and these antigens help identify foreign invaders. So if there's a defect on this gene, you're going to have difficulties clearing toxins and infections. And so if you look at this defect, if you combine this defect with that MTHFR, and there's about 24% of the population who carry this HLA defect, you're going to be more susceptible to mold illness. And so mold is the #1 cause of uncontrolled inflammation involving the innate immune system, #1. And so if you've got this chronic inflammatory response, what happens is you'll notice that you're a lot more susceptible to these VOCs, which are found in paint. You're going to be more susceptible to inflammatory toxins found in our water supply and in our environment. Now, you're also going to be triggered by these mycotoxins if you've got this chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And if you've got this HLA with the MTHFR, then you really have to be cautious with your environment. So throughout my career, I've treated a lot of patients who have what's called multiple chemical sensitivity. And in the past, it was like doctors like, oh, it's all in your head. Actually, doctors are still like that. But now we actually have some genes where we can point them out and say, look, you've got HLA. Yes, Reagan, you're a diva, but you've got the HLA. You've got the MTHFR. All right, we'll give it to you, buddy. Just this once, right?
Yeah, just this once.
Thanks for being Christian.
It's kind of like have you seen those Snickers commercials? Probably not, because you like watched TV once in the last 10 years, which I can applaud you for that. Yeah, the Snicker commercials where it's like you have different people acting like a totally different person because they're hungry and they're just a big diva.
Well, I've seen the Snickers where it's like, I've seen it on the wrapper where it's like hanger, like their marketing's brilliant.
Yeah, it is brilliant.
I got to see some of their commercials.
Don't eat a Snickers if you're hungry, though. It makes it worse.
And
it makes you
segued into, where do you get mold from?
A bunch of processed food.
Because what's in Snickers? Well, peanuts. So my kids are always like, wow, peanut butter is so much better, Dad. And they got like these tears streaming down their face. They feel like they should call like Child Protective Services. And I'm like, it's got mold in it, kids. What the beep is your, no, then you guys are like, yeah, Child Protective Services. But really, like, if you look at a Snickers, the peanuts have mycotoxins in it. And then anything that's processed, especially your nuts, those can harbor a lot of mycotoxins. So that's where like cashews are safer, certain types of almonds. But anything that you get like in a can, or like coffee beans, can be very hydrolytic, meaning they can attract mold toxins. So you got to be pretty careful with it. That's why one of the reasons we love the Bulletproof diet. And I think Dave Asprey has done some phenomenal things in just moving nutrition forward for a person like me who has these genetic issues, is because in the Bulletproof diet, and we give all of our patients the roadmap, and then we coach and we train on that. But then we also look at what your body needs based on the tests. But in that roadmap, you can see the foods that are more hydrolytic and the foods that can actually harbor more mycotoxin or more mold toxins. So just something to think about, because if you think about mycotoxins, they can be absorbed in the skin, in the airways, in the intestinal linings, and once they're inside of the body, they can trigger inflammation and oxidative stress. So you don't even have to eat it. Just breathing it, I've felt it right in my lungs. And it wasn't until I actually did the intranasal stem cells that it cleared up my brain and it cleared up my lungs like I've never felt them before. I mean, because I've struggled with exercise-induced asthma for most of my life, from the age of probably 10 is when I first remember it, up until like I'm 22 now, and so up until now, and I'm 40. But I've noticed that my lungs, now that I've done that, feels so much better because I can breathe now. And I think a big part of it is the mycotoxins, because yeast are part of that's a mycotoxin. This is a mold. This is, and yeast are at least 10 times harder to get rid of than bacterial infections. Yeast are very strong and they get into the lungs. And once they get in the lungs, it's hard to get them out. Once they get into the intestine, it's hard to get them out. We basically have to duct tape your mouth shut and say, look, no sugar, no vinegar, nothing that will feed the yeast. And then a lot of our patients, they start going gluten-free and they're still eating things that are processed and packages. You're still going to get some mold toxin there. So these things, remember, it triggers oxidative stress, which leads to more heart attacks, which leads to hormonal dysregulation. It can also cause respiratory disease, chronic fatigue, and even cancer. So got to watch out for the molds. And there's a lot of different molds. So here's some of the symptoms. Do you have sleep disturbances? Mold toxins and mold inflammation can affect your sleep. Do you have food sensitivities, irritable bowel, immune deregulation? Do you have this issue with severe fatigue? Because this could be your HPA axis not functioning properly. Do you have disrupted vitamin D metabolism? This is typical if you've got increased viral activity, and autoimmunity if you have low vitamin D levels. You have low testosterone, so you're going to have fatigue, low libido. Do you have diminished motivation? Do you have issues genetically? Do you have a history of exposure to mold or water damaged buildings? Do you have a weakened immune system due to a viral, parasitic, or bacterial co-infections? And do you have an autoimmune illness? Because these are real things. And I know a lot of people, they don't take me serious when I walk into a place. Sometimes my wife gets that kind of uncomfortable feeling when we walk into a room and I'm like, I'm not staying here. No, thank you. I'd rather sleep in the car or on the grass instead of be exposed to mold. So you got to really, take good control of your environment as best you can. But if you can't, then there's some things that we've shared today. So one of those is synapse. Go ahead, Kate.
I think that's just really important is being aware of your body, because I think sometimes we're in a state of this chronic just sludge is probably the easiest way to say it, is not like fatigue, but just you just don't feel good all the time and you get used to that. And then you're not as aware as when you walk into rooms like that. It's it doesn't faze me. And I think that's what I was referring to, when I was saying you're a diva. It was that was before I was really aware of what I was exposing myself to, or even that it affected me, because, I was just in that was well before I had made a lot of different changes with my health. And so once you get to that place where you just have a lot more awareness and feeling, then you can actually sense okay, yeah, this room is actually going to cause some issues for me. And I think it's really important that we're aware of what we're exposing ourselves to just by our senses and how we feel and how our body's reacting. Yeah.
Well, and thank you. And you're still not forgiven for calling me a diva. Even you're all of a sudden you're on my side of the fence. Interesting. The mycotoxins also make you very resentful.
Whoops.
Okay, guys. So just to finalize this, I hope you've learned something. I know some of you may be like, man, that's a lot of heavy stuff, Reagan, but it is actually, this is a real thing. And the more Roundup that we spray on our crops, the problem is the glyphosate in the Roundup is killing all the good bacteria in our soil. And so whenever you take an antibiotic, you have more propensity to have a yeast overgrowth or a mold overgrowth in your gut. Same thing's happening in our soil. So this is one more reason why it's really important to eat organic. And then if you do have this exposure, there's another peptide, and it's called VIP, or the vasoactive intestinal peptide. And this was a treatment protocol created by Dr. Richie Shoemaker, which is arguably the pioneer in the mold and mycotoxin industry. So I think next week we've got a bunch that, there's a whole lot more that I want to cover. So maybe next week we can jump in and we'll start talking about treatment protocols with mold and Lyme. So if you guys have any help that you need in this, if you're concerned that it could be the very missing piece in your health puzzle, then get in, give us a call. You can go to acueastwest.com and let's get you some help. Don't wait any longer. This stuff does destroy your brain, and don't get it to the point where it's irreparable. So thanks for being a part of this amazing group and family here at East West and in your health transformation. And Kate, any final words before we finish up?
No, just appreciate everybody being on. We had a great attendance today. I even see a few people from St. George on there. So awesome. Love you guys. And we'll be here same time, same place next week. Have an amazing week, everybody.
See you guys.